Hi, I'm Bob Eubanks, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're gonna watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug. Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is Shevy Castle, and I want to welcome her to the show. Shevy is part of the famous Castle family. You might know her father's a master mechanic, her sister is a musician and a health guru, and her brother is a famous musician, and they've all been on our show before. And wouldn't you know that Shevy has her own talent? Shevy is an author, and I've known her since she was a young girl, and it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So nice. Shevy was born and raised in Chicago and has always had a passion for fantasy fiction. Ever since early childhood, Shevy has composed fantastical stories. She took up putting pen to paper as an early teen, where her writing style blossomed from the depth of her heart and soul. Not only is Rise of the New Crown, which we're about to take a look at, Shevy's first published novel, but a story that has taken her beyond her limits and on a journey of self-discovery as an author. And she is currently in the process of writing the second book, which she's going to publish, which is part of a trilogy. And I want to take a look right now at her new book, which is out, Rise of the New Crown, The Kingdom's Oath, Book 1 by Shevy Castle. And here it is. And it's a thick book. You wrote a lot for a first book. Tell me, first of all, how do you, when you like writing when you're in high school or you know, middle school, and you start to write, how do you decide, I'm ready to write a novel? I'm ready to go into depth and expound on characters beyond what I've ever done in writing in school, and so on and so forth. What brought you to the thoughts that you could actually write a novel and know how to write a novel? Because everybody comes out who writes novels with their first books, and you always wonder those things. How does this person become an author of a fantastical novel?
Well, it's interesting. So it requires a little background history. When I was a child, I thought I was like a terrible, terrible writer because I just didn't really read much. So like, I always had story ideas in my head, but I never had the courage to sit and write. And when I did write, I kind of like shorted myself and wrote kind of like awkwardly. It was, like I said, in my early teens when I started to actually express an interest in writing, and that was more fan fictions. That's where I felt safe to write. You know, I had characters from other fictional worlds that I fell in love with, that I wanted to write about, that I wanted to express my own ideas with, and that kind of made it safe, and that's what I did through high school. But even still, like, I always had this idea in the back of my head that I wanted to be an author, and it started like a little quiet, fleeting thought. And when I was in college and grad school, I did a lot of writing for school, and I got a lot of praise from my teachers that I was a very good writer, and I always kind of had this hum in the back of my head, you want to publish your own novel, you want to publish your own book. You can do fan fictions, which is great, and people do get like famous and rich off of fan fictions, but I really always wanted to create my own characters. And I remember when I was in grad school, I had ideas about like knights and, not really dragons, even though I love dragons, but kind of like knights and royalty, which is basically what this book is. And I tried writing, it kind of just came and went. Like, I had ideas, I wrote 3 or 4 paragraphs, I tried making it fan fiction, took like more contemporary fiction characters and made them more medieval times, but it just never went. And I remember what got this novel started was I just moved out of my parents' house. Like the first night of moving out of my parents' house, I was sitting on my computer adjusting to my new room, and just to help me adjust, I was looking at fan art. And I remember I saw fan art about like betrothals and everything, and just boom, this book took off. So you were asking what got me to write this novel. I was just like, I want to write the story. And that was a year before COVID hit. So I spent that year really cranking out chapters, and then when COVID hit, I kind of hit a little bit of a slump because just adjusting to the pandemic. But then the characters came back to life for me, and I joined what's called a self-publishing school, and they helped give me like guidelines and everything to really take my book and make it from a great idea to a selling novel, like for a published novel. And I was just like, okay, fine. So I went with it. So I had a lot of help from the self-publishing school. I had a lot of help from initially Nini, my sister. She was very, very, very supportive of me. And then all of a sudden my younger brother Gavi was like, hey, I want to read your book.
By the way, I didn't even mention this. Gavi was my student when he was in elementary school, so that's another connection. But go on, yeah.
Yeah, so Gavi started reading it, and then surprisingly my dad does not write, my dad's not much of a reader, and if he reads, it's not fantasy novels, epic fantasy. It's not my dad's like style, but all of a sudden he picked it up and started reading it, and I had a lot of like wind on my back, so that just helped me like perpetuate my writing, and took the next steps of getting an editor and then going through the actual publishing phase. So really, I had a lot of support. So the idea was in my head, I had a moment of inspiration, but what helped me the most was the unconditional support from my family.
It's amazing, amazing. So let me ask you a few questions. For example, when you were younger, did you play Dungeons and Dragons because you were into that type of sport and game?
I don't think Dungeons and Dragons existed when I was a child, but
Maybe not.
yeah.
Maybe not.
I wasn't like into that. It was interesting. I love dragons, so I always drew pictures of dragons. I watched shows like Dragon Tales.
But that's more of a kid's thing.
Right.
What about when you got a little bit older? Were you into like Harry Potter and things like that, which were fantastical stories?
It's so funny you mentioned Harry Potter. I just started reading it for the first time when it came out.
Wow.
So yeah, I just actually started reading Harry Potter a few months ago. But no, in high school, actually, my friend got me into reading. She gave me a book. It's called The Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funk. And that's kind of what got me into it. So I read that, then I read Aragon, which is a whole thing about like dragons. So I did read a lot of like dragon fantasies in high school, which really influenced my writing when I was that age. But the funny thing is the fan fiction I wrote was not about dragons. The fan fiction I wrote was actually Nintendo characters, because that's what I was exposed to a lot. Like the Wii came out when I was in high school, so Gavi and I would play, and the characters would just inspire me. So I had a lot of fun with like Nintendo characters and taking them, and because again, I feel like Nintendo characters, I mean, they have a story, but you don't really see them play out like you do in movies. You kind of just see them like in their game, and you don't really see their body language, especially those types of games. You just see dialogue. So I had a lot of fun taking those characters and like writing a story where you can actually feel the body language. So that's where, again, I felt safe to get out my like fantastical ideas through like those Nintendo characters.
Very cool, very cool. So people don't know this about you, but I do, of course, that you went to Jewish day schools growing up, and you learned Tanakh, you learned the Bible, you learned things. I had an author on the show once who said what she did, she wrote about biblical characters and their history and things that weren't written in the Tanakh, in the Bible. She would take those characters and build stories around them and kind of fit them back into their biblical stories of what went on in their lives. Did the stories of like Malachim and things like that you learned, the book of Kings and things like that growing up, and Samuel and stuff, the idea of kingdoms and mystery and things like that build you in any way into your love of the idea of writing about kingdoms and stories and kingdoms like you have in your book?
Not really, but as I wrote, it kind of did, because the name in this book of the three kingdoms, I call them Shloshchim, and the history, I'll give a little spoiler for my book, is these three kingdoms under the name of Shloshchim together came from a tribe from the east. So I was kind of alluding to the Middle East, which people could take it to be, Arabia or wherever, but I took it more to mean Israel, but again, it's really up to the audience. But the nomads were called Kochavim, which means stars. So they had a chief of that Kochavim that searched out westward, which is supposed to be like Europe. And the chief died, so he had 3 sons. Let's see if I remember their names. Gidon, Ze'ev, and Dun. Even though it's spelled Dan in the story, I actually have a pronunciation page. In the end, it's pronounced Dun. So they were called Shalosh Achim because it's Shalosh Achim, the 3 brothers that established, each brother ruled a country that were kind of united. So it kind of is based off of Judaism, not specifically biblical, but more Jewish concepts, Hebrew words, a more, I guess, messianic mindset, because the whole goal is to reunite the kingdoms into like one unity, and kind of, I feel like more of a biblical belief is that everybody should be united at the end. So that's kind of the goal I'm going for in this book. So Judaism is more indirectly imbued in there.
So cool. It's so cool. Which might, even though readers who read it may not make those connections, Jewish readers who have a background might find those connections and find it even more interesting because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
in their take. But I want you to read for me the summary of your book, because unfortunately I can't pronounce the names, and so I couldn't read it. But read a little bit of summary of your book. This is the summary of Rise of the New Crown by Shevy Castle, and we'll talk about that a little bit more after your summary. Go ahead.
Okay. Peace and prosperity once united the kingdoms of Pflanzatar, Amenschen, and Gemwaith. However, after centuries of Gemwaith's perpetual betrayal, Pflanzatar and Amenschen shunned the Third Kingdom. A new threat rises as a result, placing 3 individuals in a precarious position. Prince Andrew of Pflanzatar is arranged to marry Lady Deborah of Amenschen in order to strengthen their kingdom's bonds. However, they both harbor the same secret. Neither wants to go forth with the marriage. The prince is in love with another woman, and the lady has no interest in royal politics. Meanwhile, in Gemwaith, the hunter Casper is forced to wield the sword of an army he vehemently opposes. He wants only to return to his family, but with war coming, fate has other plans. As tensions between all 3 kingdoms escalate to even greater heights, the action of these 3 people can either help turn the tide for the better or for the worse. They are faced with the impossible choice. Do they prioritize their respective kingdoms or put their own ambitions and families first? Is peace still attainable for the 3 kingdoms, or will the lands be steeped in destruction and demise?
Very cool. By the way, page 683, pronunciations. Unbelievable, unbelievable. 682 pages of story. When you sat down and really were focusing on the book, did you have any idea it was going to be this long?
No, I didn't. It kind of just happened. Like, most people were saying, okay, novels are 100,000 words, and I'm like, oh, I'm like 200,000. Okay, how did that happen? I just really went in depth with a lot of characters, and there's a part of me that kind of like, is this too long? Is this too short? But then I'm reading Harry Potter book 5, and it's 800 pages, so I'm like, I'm okay.
Tell me, when you're taking a story like this, and you come to the end of your first book, which is really so intense in its activities and what's happening in it, and then you start the second book of your trilogy. Do you try to, as you're working on your second book of your trilogy, do you try to carry over these characters into it, or like a spin-off from a television show? Do you try and take it and then spin it off into a whole new story with all new characters based on these characters from your first story?
So I do it more the first way, where it's one big story broken up into 3 books, because otherwise my book would be forever. Like, it was originally going to be a standalone, and my book coaches advised me, especially as a new author, to do a trilogy, or a series more accurately, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to be committed that long. But when I was finishing up this book, I said either it's going to be really crunch the ending, or it's going to be a 3,000 page book, to which I said might as well just break into 3 books. So that's more of my approach, just 3 sub-stories in one big story.
So when you take a character and start to build a story around a character, are you building the character into the story, or are you building the story around the character? Which means, are you building a whole story about this character and their personality and who they are and where they are? Or are you building a set with a story and then fitting that character into it? How does that work in your mind? Because different authors do it differently.
Yeah, I'm very into character development, so it's more the first way. I build the characters, and I develop a rapport with the characters, and then I build the world to fit around them, because I love characters. I love, even in real life, understanding how people work, who they are. I'm a teacher, so I have students, and I love sitting there and understanding the way my students think, and I more cater my curriculum to their needs. And I've been teaching, I've been a classroom teacher for about 7 years, and in the beginning I started off with, this is the curriculum, and I tried molding my students into the curriculum. Now I've modified my curriculum over the years to fit my students. So I would say more like that. I have my character, I build my character, I sense who they are, and I have a general idea of the world I want. Like this book, I knew it was gonna be like medieval times, or the Middle Ages, if you wanna get historically accurate. But most of the world was based on who my characters are.
Very nice. Speaking of medieval times, so there's like a restaurant and show called Medieval Times out there, and other things that are kind of in this character. Have you ever gone to Wisconsin to the fair there?
The Renaissance Fair?
The Renaissance
Fair?
Fair?
Yeah, I've been there once.
And do those things inspire you when you see them?
Yeah, they did. I actually like the idea of like the Renaissance Fair kind of going back in time in a way. I went there for a friend's birthday. It was a lot of fun, actually. It was just a whole day of fair, and I haven't gone since. I've wanted to go back. And it did inspire me. Like, my friend made me this costume and gave me like a whole makeover, and it was like a whole fun thing. And I just had fun like playing there, and you know, everybody spoke to everybody. It was kind of that place. So I wasn't like awkwardly walking around the park like, oh, a bunch of strangers. Everybody talked to everybody. It was like, we all were kind of in the land of pretend, and we just had so much fun. So it was definitely a fun experience that I would like to do it again at some point.
Very nice. A lot of actors want to be authors, and a lot of authors want to be actors. Did you ever think that you'd like to be one of your characters, or put your story to a play or something like that, and actually be one of the characters? Is that something that's like run through your head?
You know, I don't know if I could ever play my own characters. It feels kind of weird. But it's funny that you say that, because Nini and Gavi have role-played my characters. My Nini played, you know, some of the female characters, and Gavi played some of the male characters, and I watched them interact, and they were totally like doing improv. And it felt so like humbling to me to watch my characters being played out in front of me, because I get to see how people take my characters and keep them in character and play them out. My students have asked me to make a movie and they should star in it, and my joke to them is, you guys can play the villain.
Very cute, very cute. So tell me something. This is your mode of writing right now, because you're in the middle of a second book of a trilogy that you want to do. What other type of style would you want to write after you do this? What would be your alternate style of writing? What would be your alternate book that you say, after I do this trilogy, I want to do something completely different? What would that be? How have you thought about that, and where would you go with that?
I'm thinking, because I have a couple other series I want to write. One's an urban fantasy, one's a sci-fi, but they kind of follow the fantasy guidelines. But if I want to write something completely different, I feel kind of embarrassed to admit this, because those who know me know I hate horror, and I get like nightmares from even seeing pictures of like some of these horror people. But I thought about trying to write a horror story. It wouldn't be a series, but like maybe a short story, like maybe 20 to 30 page story that kind of creeps you out. Because I wrote something like that when I was in high school, or at least I started to. I had this kind of, I didn't think it was too haunted, but I had this idea, and I remember my friends and even Nini was like, Shevy, that's kind of creepy. So I thought about maybe trying to write something more horror within a certain timeline. I feel like horror, it can't be like full on. A lot of horrors, they go places where I would never bring myself to go. But at the same time, this would kind of tamper with it without like fully getting there. So something I'm possibly keeping my mind open to if I don't give myself nightmares.
Very cool, very cool. Well, we're here on Taped with Rabbi Doug, I'm here with Shevy Castle. She is the author of Rise of the New Crown, The Kingdom's Oath, Book 1 of a trilogy. And it is a fantasy, and it is an amazing book. And stay with us, we're going to be right back.
Maria?
Yeah?
Some things on TV scare Elmo.
If some things on TV make you or you feel sad or scared, tell a grown-up that's close to you.
Like you, Maria.
Yes, like me.
I'm Yosef Mendelevich, and you are watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
Welcome back. We're here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. I'm here with Shevy Castle. She's the author of Rise of the New Crown, Kingdom's Oath, Book 1. What is the Kingdom's Oath? I was wondering about that. What is the Kingdom's Oath, and is it revealed in this book, or is it something that carries over into the next books of your trilogy?
It's actually revealed in this book, and that's what helped me come up with the title of the series. It's not too much of a spoiler because chapter 5 of this book goes through the history of the kingdoms. It's a good way of introducing it. So again, just basically the 3 kingdoms that was mentioned, Pflanzatar, Amenschen, and Gemwaith, were each established by each was established by a son of the chief of the Kochavim, and they made an agreement with each other. The oath of Shloshchim, or the kingdom's oath, is basically that, they stay together, they provide for each other. Each kingdom has a resource they can provide for one another, and that's part 1 of the oath, is to provide the resource. Part 2 of the oath is basically if one of the brothers is, for whatever reason, having a hard time keeping up to his end of the oath because of hardships or whatever, the other 2 brothers help out. And they never leave each other behind. They never abandon each other. They're like family. So if there's a hardship or if there's something going on, they stick together. So I'm not going to reveal what those resources are because it's in the book. I don't want to read my whole book to them.
You'd spoil it for them when they go out and read it, certainly. But that's kind of cool. Who's your favorite character in the book?
Oh God, I've gone through so many. I like them all, but I have to say I have 4 main characters, 2 women, 2 men. I think the men are my favorite characters. Casper and Prince Andrew.
Cool. And in the book it says, the very end of the book, interestingly enough, as you would expect probably at the end of a book like this, of course, Hail King Andrew. Andrew becomes the king. Hail King Andrew. Hail King Andrew.
Yeah.
How interesting at this time of life in the world that a book like this comes out right after Queen Elizabeth dies,
King Charles.
And her son Charles becomes the king, and now we have a King Charles. We never lived with a king of England in our lives until now, and certainly Andrew is a name that goes through the kingdom of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Did the thoughts of the United Kingdom ever come into your mind when you wrote this book?
No, it didn't. It's funny because I remember there was a whole scandal, I think, with Prince Andrew going on. And I looked up and I said, Prince Andrew. So first I saw the name, because I don't watch the news, but at the gym I go to, Planet Fitness, I did see it. I see Prince Andrew. I'm like, that just stuck out to me. And all of a sudden I'm seeing all these things about Prince Andrew and the scandal. I'm like, well, my Prince Andrew is a good, solid, moral person. I know it's not common in the medieval times that a lot of the monarchies are not so clean, they're not so moral, but me being me, my characters are very, very, very moral. At least my main characters are. They're extremely moral, they're extremely good-hearted, they're in it for the right reasons. They're human, they struggle, they're not perfect saints, but that was kind of a value of mine. My characters have to be moral.
So did you, before you published your book or as you published your book, and I know that you had your mentors and stuff that were with you in this, following you and helping you along to make sure that your book would be marketable, did you send it out to any other professional authors or any other groups that review books to get reviews and comments on for yourself?
I did not. The only thing I did is after it was like published, I did these promo sites where I pay them to promote my book to their readers. So that's the only thing I did. But the reviews, what I did do is I created a launch team on my self-publishing school Facebook group, and I had a handful of people read it and review it. And that's, you know, some of the promo sites, the requirements were like a minimum of 5 reviews. So I was able to get into some of those promo sites because of those reviews. So that's more how it happened. I would like to have like an author community like down the road where we all read each other's works and comment on each other's stuff. Like one of the Amazon authors I really like, his name is Michael R. Miller, and maybe if he's watching this interview, I'll tell him, Michael, if you're watching this interview, I'm a really big fan of your story, Songs of Chaos.
Very nice.
And I hope if you read it, leave a review. I will be over the moon. And if J.K. Rowling or Suzanne Collins, who wrote The Hunger Games, like those authors, if you end up watching this interview and review my books and read it, I will be so happy that I'll be literally in cloud 9.
So you just actually brought on what my next question for you is, as we're running out of time soon. I wanted to ask you, who are your mentors as authors? And you just mentioned a few of them. Who were your mentors as authors growing up?
I didn't read much growing up, so it would be more like in high school. I had a love-hate relationship with Christopher Paolini. He wrote Aragon, because on the one hand I liked his writing style, he was a very good writer, but I didn't like that he wrote very predeterministically in the Aragon world, and I didn't like that he got like a little overly detailed, but still, like I liked when I read his story, I got a clear image of what I was reading. He was very good. Cornelia Funk also, she was very, very clear and very, like the way she wrote, I could just see the image. I feel like there's so many more authors I could, I'm just blanking out on their names, I've read so many books. I like Angie Sage. She wrote Septimus Heap, which is more of a child's story, but still, she wrote very simply, but in her simple descriptions, again, it was painted very clearly. I could just see it. And she was very entertaining, very funny. I enjoy authors that put like humor in their stories, which I try to put some humor in my book. Even though it's a little more of a serious book, I try, imbuing a little funny things here and there, because, come on, it can't be all that serious.
Okay, so just final question before we end, and that is novel or movie? When you read a novel and you watch the movie, which one entertains you more when it's put out on film?
I have to say novel, because novel's the original, they go into a lot of details. I haven't watched the Harry Potter movie, but I've seen some clips and they completely screwed up in the book, and I'm like, absolutely not. You completely you did a good job. I'll say it's a good film, you got talented actors and everything, but the novel is the original, it has everything, it has the essence. The movie cannot capture that.
Very nice, very nice. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Chevy. Shevy Castle, the author, Arise of the New Crown, The Kingdom's Oath. This is book 1, and I hope that you have much success with this book. I want to thank all of you for being with us. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, where you can also see former shows on the web. If you want to send an email to us or to Chevy, you can email us at info@tvrabbi.com. You can find her all over social media also. I will forward that email directly to her, and I know she'll get back to you personally. Once again, Rise of the New Crown by Shevy Castle. Thanks so much for being on the show, and thank you for being with us. Hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.